You're watching The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ Envy, Angela Yee, Charlamagne the God. We are The Breakfast Club. We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, sir.
Michael Moore.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
My man Michael Moore. If you don't know who Michael Moore is, he is the CEO of Charleston, soon-to-be International African American Museum. Now, tell people why this is such a big deal, Michael.
Well, you know, we have a unique opportunity. It's mostly a responsibility on our shoulders, but it's a unique opportunity. We're creating an African American history museum on the spot, largely where that history began.
Gadsden's Wharf.
It's former Gadsden's Wharf. It was the largest wharf in the colonies and the place where almost half of all the enslaved Africans who came to America throughout the entire course of the transatlantic slave trade, where they took their first steps on America. And so we're building a museum that will, you know, commemorate those people who landed there, and of course their ancestors. Will finally talk about their sacrifices and their contributions in building that city, the region, and frankly the nation. So it's a great opportunity.
Now, they did something like this in Alabama, was it?
There are African American history museums.
What's the one Oprah and Ava DuVernay and all them was at?
Is that the Lynching Museum?
In Alabama?
Yeah.
Yes, okay,
yeah,
got you.
Lynching Museum, powerful place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What made you take this job? I mean, because, you know, reading you, it said you were an exec at Coca-Cola, at Kraft.
Yeah.
What made you go and do this?
Well, you know, I grew up in a family that is surrounded by African American history. My father was an African American studies professor, and I've got people in my family who were rooted in this history. My great-great-grandfather was a man named Robert Smalls, who commandeered a Confederate boat in Charleston Harbor back in 1862 and sailed it to freedom. Got, you know, there are these memes that are going around talking about his story. So I grew up with an understanding and appreciation of African American history. And frankly, I grew up in the 70s in Boston. It was, it was kind of a tough place around racially. You know,
Definitely racist in Boston in the 70s, I'm sure.
You know, busing was a big deal, and I was, fairly frequently confronted, affronted, accosted around issues of race.
Mixed or are you?
No,
Okay, fully African.
just like you.
So you don't hold on, Michael. You don't know what he is.
I remember listening.
Michael?
Well, I remember listening to the story about I'm not Spanish.
Okay, all right, I'm fine. All right, so he knows. I'm all black.
You know he's lying about not being Spanish. That's what you know, Michael. Okay.
Go ahead.
So in any event, even though I was made to feel uncomfortable around my race, around my identity, I had this connection to someone in history who had done big things, and that really helped to support me, to give me a backbone to help push me through. And there are lots of stories about African American history. There are lots of stories of achievement and overcoming enormous obstacles. And part of what we're doing with this museum is telling those stories and connecting people to their history and to their stories like that. So,
well, between Black Panther and the idea of the International African American Museum, that's what made me go do my African ancestry. So I did 23andMe, and then I did African ancestry, and I realized I'm 97% West African.
Wonderful.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if you stand on Gadsden's Wharf in Charleston, that's a straight shot, right?
Yes, sir. Yes,
to
sir.
West Africa.
And that's part of why Charleston and Gadsden's Wharf was such an important place. The channel, you can stand on the site of our museum and you'll go right past Fort Sumter, which is where the Civil War began, and you keep going, you'll head right to Africa. So, yeah.
How big is the museum?
The museum's going to be about 47,000 square feet. It's going to be lifted off the ground, 14 feet. It'll be about 140 yards long, about 80 feet wide. And
tell him how much it costs, Michael. Do a little humble brag. Just tell him.
Yeah, the project in total is $100 million, and it was broken up into four $25 million buckets. $25 million, the city initially bought the land for the project. $25 million equally came, 12.5 each from the city and the county. We got 25 million from the state of South Carolina, and we've raised 25 million in private philanthropy. And we're not done. We're still, going back. We tariffs and steel prices and all kinds of things have increased, and so we're continuing to raise money, but we're really close.
How do we
And
keep this
Charleston's a
open?
huge tourist attraction, so I mean,
I was going to say
like,
that. Yeah, how are we going to keep it open now? Building it, but
Well,
we got to keep the lights on. Now.
And that's another
employees.
great thing. I mean, I tell people I will have a tin cup firmly affixed to my hand, out raising money for the foreseeable future. But one of the things that's really important is, we've been out talking to lots of corporations and lots of foundations and the like, and they've been enormously supportive. But it's really important, for us to really breathe life into this museum for just everyday folks to get involved. And we've created a charter membership program where folks can get in on the ground floor, and for $25 on up, people can become a member. They will always be a member. They need to, on an annual basis, to keep it active, but folks can get in on the ground floor and become a charter member, and it's an important place. Folks from Europe have the monument. I'm blanking the name on it now. The Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island and the like, and that's their place where their ancestors took
Now
their
we have our
first
Ellis Island.
steps. And we really, folks of African descent haven't really had that. Well, we've done the genealogical work, and we believe that there's a greater than 90% probability that all living African Americans have at least one relative who landed on the site of our museum in Charleston. We know, for example, that Michelle Obama's original American ancestor landed and then ended up in a rice field up in Georgetown. And so it's a powerful place. Lonnie Bunch, who's the head of the Smithsonian African American Museum in D.C., calls it one of the most sacred places of African American history in the entire continent. So it's an important place, and we're really proud and privileged to be able to be building a museum there.
How do you think knowing your true heritage will impact people's lives?
Well, I think it's important. Abe Lincoln said you got to know where you came from to know what to do next. And I just think, part of the challenge of African American history is that for most of us, we can only go back a couple of generations. There are some real profound obstacles to African American genealogy. I think the biggest being that prior to 1870, the names of African Americans weren't listed on the United States Census. So to continue to follow your family tree back, you've got to piece together bits of information. And so we're building a Center for Family History, which we aspire to be really one of the preeminent centers of African American genealogy and family search in the country. We want to take people for free. People will come to the museum, and for free we'll have genealogy professionals who will walk people through and help them to fill in the gaps of their family tree and to understand a little bit better about where they came from. The other thing I think is so important, our history didn't start in chains, in bondage, in slavery. We folks of African descent, the original people came from Africa, and there were so many enormous contributions and discoveries that started in Africa. And so we're going to start the story there and with the contributions that those folks made there. And then, of course, we'll talk about what happened in Gadsden's Wharf and then what happened beyond in the building of this nation.
How's the DNA experience at the museum going to work? Like, what's the process for that?
Well, two things. So there's the DNA piece, and we're not going to actually do the DNA testing, but we'll assist people because it's not as easy. I mean, we'll help people sort of, go through the results and make sure that they understand everything. But the real piece is with the family search is that, to piece together your family tree, you've got to connect, whether it's bills of sale or insurance records, or there's all kinds of records. Folks kept a lot of records back in the day, and so we'll help people do that. And one of the things that I think is also so important is that slavery, it ripped families apart. There were families obviously back in Africa, and then even in this country. I mean, people were sold. It's well known where families were broken apart on a daily basis. And so it's almost like a zipper that was unzipped and separated. Well, through the genealogy work that we're doing, we're going to re-zip that zipper up and reconnect those families. DNA can actually identify, cousins and relatives who may have otherwise never known that they existed. I've been working on this project for a lot, and we've got a professor at Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and we've been working on this a while, and all of a sudden we found out we're cousins, and so
wow.
that's going to happen a lot.
Now, when is the museum open?
We are hoping to break ground sometime next year, and then it'll be about a 2-year construction cycle. So we're looking to open, 2021, mid-2021 or so.
And how do you connect to the younger people? The one thing, I'm not too familiar with South Carolina, but I know with like the museum in D.C., there's so many other things around D.C. that schools will have trips there because it's not just seeing the museum, it's the White House, it's the Pentagon, it's this, that, and the other. What else in South Carolina? Because the whole goal is to have trips where students can actually go to a trip and spend a little time at the museum.
Downtown, where it's at, is like one of the biggest tourist attractions in America. I don't want to say attractions, but tourists love to come to Charleston, South Carolina for whatever reason.
Yeah, Charleston's one of the biggest tourist destinations, really globally.
That's a fact.
Always gets, sort of records, everything. But we take the education piece really seriously. It's not enough for us to just have an interesting experience in the building. We want to connect people. First of all, we want to connect people with the history that's in that region. Everywhere you turn in the Low Country, there's history. And so
we'll Vesey's house.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
we'll send people
market.
to the Avery, down to Penn Center, just up to the rice fields. But also from an education standpoint, we're going to have a very active educational program. We're creating curricula, K through 12 curricula that will help teachers teach this history. African American history has not gotten the airtime, the voice, the platform that it really deserves when you think about the contributions that people of African descent made in building this country. So we'll support teachers in teaching this history. We'll have summer, kinds of programs for young people. So we take education really, really important.
That's why I was happy when I saw you on the CNN United Shades of America with W. Kamar Bell. Because he was, profiling the Low Country, but then I'm like, okay, when am I going to see somebody I know?
Yep.
And then it was you.
Yeah. No, that was great. And slowly but surely we're trying to get the word out. We're trying to tell people. We really hope that over time we'll create a sense of that people will want a pilgrimage to Charleston. I mean, again, if half of the people who came to America through the transatlantic slave trade landed at Charleston, and if we believe that just about everybody, all living African Americans, have an ancestor, we want people to come back, to reconnect with that history, to reconnect with their first American ancestor. And so we're hoping we want to invite people back, create sort of a homecoming, invite people back to come see this place.
It's interesting. We talk about Charleston, downtown Charleston, being a destination spot for people all around the world. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's how come they know our history better than we do, because it's right there for us to learn. We just don't go take advantage of it.
Yeah, and it hasn't always been easy, but we want to create an experience that will both inform but also inspire. We want. It's important for me. I have 4 youngsters, 4 young sons, and let me take a step back. When I think about this project and I think about what guides me in creating this institution, there are 2 sort of North Stars that I follow. One is our ancestors. I want to create something that would make them proud, that would finally pay homage to their sacrifices and contributions. But then the other is our children. We want to create something that is inspirational, that informs, and that just inspires them to perhaps increase the arc of aspirations over their lives, and to think that, hey, I can do something. One of my favorite quotes is, whether you think you can or not,
you're right.
You're right. And that, to me, that speaks to the psychology of achievement. You got to be able to see yourself and believe that you can do things. And, people of African descent have done amazing things in building this nation. And so we want to deliver that message to children, to young people, and hope that they take on bigger aspirations.
Has there been any resistance?
No, not really. I mean, I think it took a while to develop the political case for it. The brainchild for this project is former mayor, Charleston Mayor Joe Riley. Yeah, who announced this in the year 2000. And at the time, I think, people were like, what? What is that? How is that going to work? But I think now, and particularly, with the climate in this country and the Mother Emanuel tragedy a number of years ago, I think people realize, and I also mentioned, I think the opening of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, I think the interest around this history has really risen. It's peaked. And so, you mentioned the lynching museum in Alabama, and there's a new African American History Museum in Mississippi, and we're open this history. People have a thirst for this.
So
this
it took
history.
18 years from when he announced it until
Yeah.
it finally. Wow.
Yeah. It
Still
took-
being built. We still got another
and we
2
still,
years.
yeah, we
Another
still
2-3
got
years.
we still got some more money to raise, but we're getting really, really close.
I think
Major
the
Raleigh
internet-
is
the internet-
interesting.
The internet killed a lot of it because I was thinking, as we're talking about the museums, as a kid in school, we would go to the museums. My parents would take me to the museums, but now the feeling is not there as much because my kids see it online all day long. Like, when they want to go to the internet or if they want to see the Statue of Liberty or go to the museum or the Intrepid, it's easy for them to go online. Before, we had to actually go. If I wanted to see what the Intrepid was about, my parents had to take me, which is the sad part. And I'm thinking to myself, I have to take my kids to museums and things like that more.
Well, and the interesting thing, we're thinking a lot about that challenge. Young people are very connected to their technology, to their cell phone, and we want to leverage that in a way that will supplement the experience. We want to, for example, we'll have beacons in our exhibits so that as you walk past, we'll have a free smartphone app. It'll push information to your phone, and if you want to learn more, then you can learn more, or you can.
I was thinking, Disney does that, and I was thinking of that. You have your phone where you go to certain things, and let's say it's the Harry Potter part, and it'll send you information on Harry Potter and what it is, and that would be perfect because it'll be interactive.
Yeah, we of course don't want, people walking
On their
around with their
phones.
On their
head
phones, right,
down
right,
and
right.
not sort of experiencing, but we want to create something that supplements the experience, and so yeah, we think that'll be good.
With all of this stuff coming up, the International African American Museum, the Lynching Museum in Alabama, do you think Confederate monuments should come down?
You trying to get me in trouble?
Question.
Well, I think the museum doesn't take a position on that. Personally, that issue affects me deeply. When I walk past Marion Square, John C. Calhoun is there, and it impacts me because I know what that person and others who supported that cause, I know what they felt about me, about my ancestors. It's very painful. For most folks, just to give some context, when I think broadly about the Civil War, I think about Abe Lincoln. I mean, that's not really accessible. That was a long time ago. But for my family, we've had the benefit of really long generations. So, for example, I mentioned Robert Smalls. He commandeered this Confederate boat, got his crew and their families, and sailed themselves to freedom. And he did that on May 13th, 1862. And my great-grandmother, Elizabeth, was on that boat as a youngster, and she lived a long life. She lived till she was 101 or so. She died just a couple of years before I was born. I was born in 1962. She died in 59. So I have lots of pictures of my great-grandmother with my mother, with my grandparents. When I go visit my mother now, I sleep in my great-grandmother's bed, the bed that my grandmother was born in 1897. So I say all that to say, when I engage with these monuments and the like, it's not a philosophical thing. It's not like a theoretical thing. It's personal because I know what that represented and how that impacted people that I feel very close and connected to. So I think it's complicated. I think it's not easy, and I think everyone wants to feel proud about those who precede them, but at the same time, I think it's.
Sounds like for you personally, you would like him to come down.
Well, it's painful.
I feel like if you're taking the Cosby Show off the air because of Cosby's dastardly deeds, then why are these people that raped and murdered and pillaged? Why do they have statues?
It's very complicated.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. But one of the things that I again am focused on in creating this museum, we're creating something of a counterbalance to all that. So there are lots of Confederate monuments and memorials, particularly in Charleston, as Charleston is this place that's been built on history and been built on sort of a narrative around that. And we're creating something that will bring to life the stories and the history that will complete the story. I mean, one of the things that is important about what we're doing, we're creating a museum that will have very wide and open doors. We want everyone to come, and people will experience the museum and learn from it in a variety of different ways. I mean, a couple of years ago, I went for the first time to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., and I don't have any personal history there, but I couldn't help just being deeply moved by that experience. I mean, as a human being, you just, if you have any kind of empathy in you, you have to. And so I think people.
But also because your people went through it. So, it's, that's why they.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So I didn't have history with the Holocaust Museum, but I engaged. People will come to this museum, and even if they don't have history with the African American story, it's a human story. It's an American story. I mean, I tell people all the time. I mean, this is a subset of American history. It's African American history, but this is American history. This is all of our history. And, if you care about George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, you also got to care about Denmark Vesey and Robert Smalls and Harriet Tubman, because it's all of our history.
Now, how can people help? How can people get involved to make sure they can help make sure this takes place and it stays running, the lights stay on, employees stay there?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I think, our website is iaamuseum.org, and people can go and learn more about it. And people can become charter members at iaamuseum.org/membership, and get involved, become the ground floor. It's been really heartening. I've gotten so many warm messages. A father bought his newborn a membership, and he told me the story that he just wanted his child to be on the ground floor of this very important thing. And so I think that's one thing. And follow us on social media and just just engage and get involved. We need folks to do that.
Yeah, and if you want to be the change that you want to see in the world, and you're always complaining about it not being enough education about us taught by us, then here's something to get involved in.
Yeah. And again, we're going to engage very deeply with the community, locally in Charleston, nationally, and even internationally. We, the international aspect of our mission, we take very seriously. We, for example, we're working with folks in Sierra Leone now. There's a very strong connection, you probably know, between Sierra Leone and South Carolina, but in particular between Bunce Island, which was a slave fort in Freetown Harbor, where they used to aggregate captives before sending them here. And
that's one of the regions I'm from.
Yeah,
Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, and I forgot the other one.
Yeah, as am I from Sierra Leone. But we're actually talking to folks in Sierra Leone now about retrieving a couple of artifacts. There was this long jetty that they used to march the enslaved folks on to get onto the slave ships. And the last two stones, which in a practical way represent the last two steps that so many of our ancestors took before heading to America, we're talking about taking those stones and bringing them here and putting them on the spot, our museum, where so many took their first steps, and creating a memorial to African ancestors around it that will be powerful. And we hope to be able to create that memorial in a way that people can actually reach out and touch it, and thereby potentially touch something that their ancestor touched a couple of hundred years ago in Africa. So that's going to be very
How do you get the artifacts, and what artifacts do you look for when creating a museum? Like, where are you going to get these artifacts?
Because you could lie to us and say these two rocks are the first two rocks that people
stepped
stepped on right before they got on the slave ships.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I got to give a shout out. I have an amazing team of people, with me.
Canvassing for artifacts.
Our curator, Joy Bivens, is a master at what she does, and she is developing a vision for what the museum experience will be like, what those artifacts will be like, and then we work with folks to help us discover things. And it's interesting, when people heard that our museum, that it was actually happening, it was coming, all of a sudden, you get these calls, hey, I got this thing in my attic that might be interesting, and things just kind of come out of the woodwork. Wow. And then we're targeting certain artifacts, like we are with building the relationship with Sierra Leone, and so, but it's a very, it's a very strategic, thoughtful kind of a process to make sure that we have things that represent the story that we're trying to tell.
My last question, how would a museum bring light to race-related issues we're having today?
Well, that's a great question. Again, we aspire to create a place that not only kind of talks about the past, but also uses that history, leverages that history to engage in the present. It's not enough to just kind of look on the walls and see things about what happened in the past. We feel, because of where we are, because of the role that our former mayor, Joe Riley, played in, he sort of stuck his neck out around social justice issues throughout the course of his career. We're creating a social justice action center where we will help folks to to learn best practices, to figure out the best strategies and tactics that they can take back to their communities to advocate for issues. It's important, Martin Luther King said that people of goodwill, of good conscience, have to find the thing that best fits their moral, sort of conscience. But protest we all must. And I think what he meant is that democracy is, it's something that we all have to engage with. We all have to become a part of. And so we see opportunity in leveraging this history and leveraging stories about resistance. It's important to acknowledge that, Black folks, when they came here, it wasn't all people just sort of resigned themselves. From day one, they resisted.
Yeah.
They fought. Some threw themselves over the side of slave ships. People did all kinds of things.
They didn't just lay down and
No.
take what it was given to him.
No.
Then
And
Mark
so-
Vesey is a great example of that.
Absolutely.
And he got
Absolutely.
ratted out by
sacrificed-
another brother. Another brother told on him before he could lead one of the largest slavery revolts in the history of the country at the time.
Yeah. So we want to engage. We want to help folks. People hopefully will come from all around the country to learn. We'll be sort of agnostic about the issue. People will come, learn tactics, and then take those back and help in their community. So it's going to be an active, engaged kind of a place.
And the website's up now.
IAAmuseum.org. And, we're working hard. We've got a small team, but we're building. And like I mentioned, we're hoping to break ground in the coming months. We've got a little bit of a fundraising gap. We thought we were done. We announced a couple of months ago that, we had reached our fundraising goal. And like I mentioned, tariffs and steel prices, inflation kind of happened, and we've got a little bit more of a gap to raise. But we're working hard to close that gap, and we will break ground soon. It'll take about 2 years to build, so we're very excited.
Let's
Well,
hit
thank
up
you for
Oprah.
joining us, man.
Hit up Oprah, hit up Ava.
Absolutely.
I think they'd like to be in on this.
Hit up
Well,
Charlamagne.
and the unique thing is that, again, this is the one spot where more enslaved Africans landed and were sold than any other place in the country.
Yep.
Over the course of the entire slave trade. So it's really sacred ground, and we want folks to get involved and to help us really commemorate this in a world-class way. We've got an amazing team with us, team of architects and exhibit designers and landscape architects, and it's going to be an amazing institution that will shine brightly on our city, on our state, and really on our nation.
All right. Well, Michael Moore, we appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
All right. It's the Breakfast Club. Good morning.